This is episode number 299 of the Homeowner Show. Whether you're DIY or looking to hire, we're here to help you find the best information and options for you and your home. My name is Kevin Hackett, and here with me is Craig Williams.
Hello, and welcome to the Homeowner Show. We are so glad that you could join us for another live episode here in the studio. How you doing, Kev?
Oh, man. I'm doing all right. I don't have anything to complain about today.
You could.
Well, I'm just saying I'm not going to.
Did you look in the mirror?
Well, this is all that can be done. I was actually, I went back to Arkansas, lived there for 10 years, went back and saw a bunch of people that I hadn't seen in a long time this past weekend. And I didn't look like this back then. I didn't have this beard, and everybody was like, Who's that
woolly booger up there? Yeah.
I was like, well, I stopped officiating football for one. 21 years of that, I said, okay, I'm going to be done for a little while at least. And I can grow a beard now. So here I am.
Yeah.
So how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I was going through my list of things that we've got episodes coming up about. One, I mean, like I was in Florida for Helene.
Yeah.
So we can talk about that at some point.
Yep.
This crazy Hurricane Milton is about to slam into Florida again.
It's not going to be good.
I just got back from Universal. We need to do a trip review on that. This super cool wireless bridge that I just installed on the house is insane. I'm super stoked to talk about that with everybody. Also, craziest weekend ever in college football.
Yeah.
We might be able to get into some of that today. Because you were in Arkansas. I'm actually surprised you didn't come back with like a pig hat of some sort.
Well, they tried to like give me all kinds of stuff.
It
was like this big crazy thing, and they also know they tried for 10 years to convert me, and it didn't work.
They didn't like give you like a slice of the goalpost or something.
No, well, there were a lot of goalposts that were in rivers and taken all over the place this weekend.
and we haven't even had a chance to come down off of the VP debate that happened, where we all learned that the Republican vice presidential candidate does an incredible Jim impersonation.
Yes,
he's got it. He's got the deadpan smirk.
Mm-hmm.
So all you Office fans, I know who you're voting for.
That's one way to determine what you're going to do.
It's a better reason than most of the reasons other people vote anyway.
Good point.
Dude, there's like a huge push. I don't know if you got. We'll bring our guests in here in a minute, but like there's a huge push right now to actually like kind of people out of voting.
Oh yeah.
It's like, look, we're tired of your uninformed vote. We don't want it anymore. There's people out there actually doing that and saying how like, do you remember like Rock the Vote back in the day?
Oh yeah.
They're like, that was the dumbest thing ever.
Well, it still
I don't disagree with them, but I'm like, I would love for everyone to vote in an informed manner, which we'll talk a little bit about tonight.
We might.
Not about Democrat and Republican, but other stuff.
Yep.
And then special shout out to our good buddy Jim Jackson.
Oh man.
So
so one of our longtime listeners isn't with us today, and so we're sad about that.
Yep. We celebrated his life this past Saturday, and his wife Sherry just said that one of their favorite things was listening to this.
Well, we love them,
and we love them. So love you, Sherry. We miss Jim.
That's right.
Good man. So anyway, let's get to the sponsors, and then we'll bring our guest in.
Sure.
Who you want to do first?
Let's start off with Lone Star Appliance Repair.
Lone Star Appliance Repair.
Man, they're awesome.
Like, look, anytime that you can text a company as the initial reach out.
You mean I don't have to pick up a phone and go? No.
And there is like this whole thing. There's this anxiety about calling a new number.
Yeah.
And someone that you don't know. Mm-hmm. But like there's like a certain amount of security that you have in just sending that text message.
Well, I think part of it is like I don't know how much this is about to cost me.
Yeah.
I got to talk to who and what.
Yep.
And I just texting them. It's like one of those things you put off the entire day, and you're like, it's 9:30 and this washing machine still doesn't work. So I think I'm just going to send a text message.
Yeah.
They probably won't message me back, and I'll be okay with that.
Yeah.
But then they do.
They do.
Yeah.
And we hammer on this all the time. Look, it's way more affordable to repair most appliances than it is to replace them.
That's right.
Also, if you have like a matching set, you don't want to break up the set because that would be sad.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I think a lot of people don't realize about appliance repair is like they also do maintenance. And one of the big ones is cleaning.
Yeah.
So like getting your dishwasher cleaned, getting your washing machine cleaned. I don't know if you've ever done that before, but
but most people are like, it cleans every time I wash it, doesn't it?
No. Like, look, there's filters on, and they get nasty.
Yeah, they do.
And like, not only that, they'll make your clothes stink. And if you don't do it on a regular basis, and if you don't know how or you don't want to, and it's kind of icky for you, hire somebody else to do it.
Yeah, they'll do it on
and they'll probably do a better job than you would.
Regular basis. They'll come out there, what is it, every quarter or however often, take care of it.
Well, and like, so in our neighborhood, one of the things that's been going around is like, this neighborhood has its own water treatment facility.
Yeah.
Has for years. One of the things that it has is a lot of calcium, which kills a coffee pot of mine at least once a year.
Oh, jeez.
And so, but like, that's also the same water that's running into your dishwasher. That's the same water that's running into your washing machine. All those water features that you have in your home get calcium buildup a lot quicker in this neighborhood than they do in most others, you know, and we've tried to remedy some of that with like a whole home filter and things like that, but you can't catch it all.
Sure.
And so that's why it's important also to do a lot of the maintenance on your appliances. And that's why you sometimes need a professional to come and actually do that. Yeah. Decalcification on an appliance. I mean, that can be tiresome and not fun.
No.
But they'd be happy to.
That's right.
Take care of it for you.
That's right. So if you want to get one of your appliances repaired, all you got to do is call or text 936-647-2364, 936-647-2364.
Give them a call.
That's right.
Also, True Texas Solar sponsoring the show tonight.
That's it.
We love these guys. I think solar in general has gotten a bad rap.
Well, since its inception, it's gotten a bad rap.
Yeah, for numerous reasons.
I mean, I think people in general have this idea of like, if the government has to incentivize me to do it, it's probably not worth doing.
Right. We could talk about taxes like that too, but like I would disagree on that front. But like,
I would too.
Yeah,
I'm just saying that it's a common misconception.
It is a common misconception. Yeah, and well, not only that, and there's grifters and thieves and con men out there
who do pest control and other things.
Right?
I mean, it could be literally anything,
yes.
right?
Right.
But the good people are still out there.
The ones that irritate me are these ads you see on YouTube. Just like, do you know that it's required in the state of Texas that they give you solar panels for free? And I'm like, bull.
That's not true.
I know that's not true.
No.
But that's what's great about working with a company like True Texas Solar. They are the scam hunters, man. Like they are here to inform you about what it actually is going to cost to get power independence for your home.
That's it.
And they want a full system in place. Because I think a lot of times it's like, well, just put solar panels on. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so what's that going to do? That's just sending power to the home. What are you doing with that power? Okay, you probably need a battery if you actually want to be able to survive a hurricane. Or if it's a cloudy day and you have the battery, but the battery runs out, you want to be able to have a generator that could tap into that. And so they can design that full system for your home. And it doesn't have to be one of these expensive Generac $20,000 generators, because that solar system's already expensive. That battery is really expensive.
Right.
You can recharge that battery with a small generator.
Yeah.
And they can talk to you about all the different options and in all the different ways that you can power your home and have independence from the grid. You can't get cut off from the grid if you're already tapped into the grid. Don't even ask.
Right.
You just can't.
No.
But they're going to give you the best system that you can afford.
Yeah.
So
it works. And if you want to learn more, just give Josh a call. His number is 936-286-8325.
25.
All right.
Who are we talking to tonight?
And I'm really excited. Tonight we've got a special guest. I'm gonna bring him in just a second. His name is Dr. Mark Ruffin, and he doesn't like the doctor part, but we're gonna call him Doctor for everybody's sake. And
give him his cred.
He'll just be Mark from here on out. But Mark is the superintendent of Montgomery ISD in Montgomery, Texas. And Mark, we're glad to have you. If you wouldn't mind, just tell people a little bit about yourself.
Thank y'all very much. I appreciate it. And Matter of fact, it's so funny that y'all mentioned the first sponsor there, Texas Appliance Repair.
Yeah.
Lone Star Appliance Repair. Yeah.
An hour and a half ago, my wife told me our washing machine stopped working today.
I know someone to
So
call.
it sounds like but it's late, so I'm going to give him a text.
There you go.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
do it right now.
That's great.
That's it.
That's great.
You can do it.
But no, I appreciate y'all having me. Like I said, my name is Mark. I'm the superintendent of Montgomery ISD, very proud superintendent. My family and I moved here in January, so we have done a lot of the things y'all talk about over the last 10 months in terms of being a new homeowner in a new area and trying to get connected to the services that we need. And so I'm excited to engage in this conversation. And I can tell already that, man, I'm going to love this conversation. Just y'all's dialogue and y'all's approach to it. It is definitely my style and my personality. So thank y'all.
Awesome. Well, cool, man. Well, the impetus behind all this, and I know you've been all over the place, and I'm sure you're exhausted at this point because there's a big election that's coming up, and yes, obviously the presidential election, but there's a very important prop that is on the ballot in Montgomery that's related to the schools, and it's been part of your job along with your team to get the information out about it. So I'm going to let you just lay out what Prop A is, and then we'll get into some discussion from there.
Well, thank you, and you're right. It's where we're focused right now because it is the most critically important thing to educate our stakeholders on. And within Montgomery ISD, we are just getting closer and closer to that 10,000 student mark. We're about at 90. Actually, I can tell you we're at 9,926 students as of this morning.
Wow!
And so. The thing within Montgomery is, in general, it's really hard to comprehend the amount of folks and the amount of people and equity and effort that goes into running a school district. And so what we're really working on allowing folks to understand, and regardless of political affiliation, all those things aside, my job is just to educate.
Sure.
And just to inform. People are going to vote however their heart tells them to vote. My job is to make sure that when they get to the ballot, when they get to that point where they're selecting their choice, they're educated on what they're voting on. And I think it doesn't matter if it's a school election or a candidate-based election, nationally or locally. We need educated and informed and engaged stakeholders to cast their votes.
Yeah.
And so that's really what our effort is about educating folks on what Prop A is and what Prop A isn't. And to kind of put a very 30,000-foot view on this, we in Montgomery ISD, we've adopted over a $4 million deficit budget this fiscal year. So for our homeowners there, thinking that lens of that means we're going to spend $4 million more than we take in this year. And
that's a problem.
It's a challenge.
Yeah.
And it's not a pace of play that we can maintain.
Yeah.
We can't do that year over year. The state. Go ahead.
Real quick, what is actually causing the deficit?
It's a great question. So it really is kind of a perfect storm. Before we can ever call a tax rate election, which is what Prop A is, we're required to do an efficiency audit. The state of Texas says you have to go hire a third-party auditor to come in and look at you compared to 10 like districts. They call that your peer district group. And that's based on your demographics, based on your community base, tax rate, all those things. To make sure that you're looking in the mirror first. Like that's a good law. That's a good expectation that you should have to look at your own finances before you go ask your stakeholders, your taxpayers to consider the approval of a tax rate election. So what that has done is it's shown us what we already knew, is that within Montgomery ISD, we get less per revenue per student. Like when you look at just those 10 peer districts, we get $1,500 less per kid in revenue than those 10 peer districts. We spend less in every expenditure category, from instruction to administration to extracurriculars. I think the only one that we actually tip over by a couple dollars per kid is counseling and student support services. And that's all posted on our website. That's all very outward facing. We're as transparent as we can possibly be. And so the causes of where we are with this $4 million deficit, one of them, and honestly, it's probably the biggest one, is a stagnant funding. The basic allotment, that's the amount of money we get per kid, has not changed since 2019.
Oh, man.
So if you just close your eyes and reflect what's all happened and transpired since 2019, Oof. It's a bunch.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you this. My grocery bill feels it. My gas bill feels it. My electricity bill feels it. Like, every aspect of my life feels the inflation that's happened. And that doesn't just not happen in schools. I mean, they've got a lot of those very same bills.
We have a lot of those same costs. I mean, we have let's see, we transport 4,500 kids on school buses a day. It's a lot of fuel.
Yeah.
We drive over 1 million miles every year.
Wow.
On school buses. It's a lot of fuel.
Well, and I want to jump in right there. You drive more than you have to compared to other districts in the area.
We do.
And
is it because you're having to go further, or?
No, because districts have decided, whether that's for budgetary reasons or for staffing reasons and just their ability to hire bus drivers, a lot of districts have put in a radius in place that says if you live within a mile, 2 miles of a campus, you're not eligible for bus transportation. We'll go pick you up, but you got to live outside of a 2 mile radius. Within Montgomery ISD, we don't have that.
Right.
If you live in our school district and you go to the school you're zoned for, we will come pick you up. Part of that, honestly, it helps relieve traffic congestion.
Right.
The more kids that ride our buses and we can get them all there on one stop, helps our car rider lines. But the challenge is, with Prop A and the future looking into the future of if it does or does not pass, is that, like I said, we can't maintain a $4 million deficit budget year over year. And so we're going to have to reduce that deficit going into next school year, which means cuts.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we can't start with our first grade teachers, our second grade teachers. We start away from the classroom and work in. But unfortunately, all those cuts, at some way, shape, or form, end up back in the classroom teacher. Like all of those roles and responsibilities.
It's going to affect the ratios. It's going to, yeah.
It really is. And so transportation's a factor of it. But the stagnant funding levels is like our insurance premiums alone. Like we carry insurance on every one of our buildings, liability, cyber, hazard, all of those things. Our insurance premiums have gone up $750,000 since 2019.
Yeah.
And we're not a privately owned industry to where we can just go generate additional revenue.
Right.
Like we can't go hustle. Like as pest control, if y'all need to generate revenue and you have a down quarter, hey, let's put a strategic plan together to make sure that we generate more revenue next semester or next quarter. We can't do that. Ours is set by what the state funds us by. Also, our expenditures, we're really limited on how we can control our expenditures. I've told this this reference time and again in these community meetings that I've had, is that in the same meeting that we celebrated cutting just under $1 million from our budget going into this school year, we also, the very next item we had to talk about was approving $1 million in new positions for special education. If a student comes into Montgomery ISD, we're public education. We educate all.
Right.
We don't get the choice. We can't turn you away because we can't do it.
Right.
If you're in our school district and you come to us and say, hey, I'm student Johnny, and here's my services that I need, if that means we have to hire new staff to do it, we're forced to do it.
Yeah.
And so there's only so much control that we have. And Prop A really is exercising that control. It's exercising the local control that says, of all the things that we have, a tax rate election is one of those. We can put that in our taxpayers and our stakeholders' hands and allow them to weigh in on that.
Right.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what the option that you have chosen as a school district to go with, because the problem with so much of the deficit is not only all of the things you're talking about, the deficit, but then there's a certain amount of what's called recapture that the state has required from Montgomery. So I want you to touch on the recapture part of it. And I think, those of us who have been around for a long time, the old Robin Hood law is what we called it. And I don't know if it's probably somewhat similar to that. But there's recapture going on, but then there's also some options that as a city that can be exercised, and that's where y'all come in. So I'd like you to hit on just kind of explaining what that looks like.
Yeah, so recapture occurs, and that's on kind of another one of the misnomers of how we're funded is, school districts don't get to set the amount of money it takes to run their school district. The state of Texas says, here's what you're allocated. Here's what you should run your school district.
And you've got a budget with inside that number.
That's it.
Okay.
And that, so let's say that's a bucket. A 5-gallon bucket is how much money Montgomery ISD has to operate a school district. That bucket is filled with tax collections and it's filled with state aid. For property wealthy areas like Montgomery ISD, the vast majority of that bucket is filled with tax collections. So the state only has to contribute minimal to fill the rest of our bucket. Recapture happens when tax collections overflow that bucket.
Okay.
So they fill the bucket all the way up in tax collections, and we collect more than the state says we should run our district on. And so everything that overflows is scooped up by the state and taken back and redistributed. Not to Montgomery ISD, but to other districts. At least that's the way the law is intended to be.
Sure.
Is that it's redistributed to other districts.
Is that intended to help fund like poor neighborhoods and things like
it is.
that? Okay.
Yep, it is. And so...
Well, you said something there. That's the way it's supposed to be done.
The way it's supposed to be done.
But it may not necessarily go that way.
Yeah.
And so you should probably...
I'm going to stay away from that.
Yeah, no, not you.
Stay away from that one.
But the listener might be interested to kind of dig if they really want
Sure.
to. Okay.
Yep. And so within Montgomery ISD over the last 10 years, I think we've paid probably close to $10 million in recapture.
Wow.
So money that's going away,
money that's
not
going away.
getting put back in the district.
Money that's going, exactly.
Okay.
And so this past year, we did not pay any recapture. That's
okay.
The year before that, we paid $3 million in recapture.
Wow.
So part of the reason this year we paid no recapture was our tax rate was compressed through new legislation, 18 cents.
Okay.
So taxpayers in Montgomery ISD saw an 18-cent tax rate decrease.
Wow.
Last year.
That like never happens, I feel
Never
like.
happens. And it's based on what your property value growth is.
Okay.
So every school district in Texas who had any sort of property value growth saw a tax compression. But if they had a lot of property value growth, they saw a big tax compression. So that's another one of the misnomers within how we're funded is you can look at the last 10 years in Montgomery ISD property values. People just naturally associate as our values go up, that means our school district gets more money, and that's not true at all. Our property values have increased over 100% in the last 10 years. So we had $4 billion in 2014, closer to $9 billion in 2023, 2024. So that's a 100% increase, and our revenue per student over that same time period has increased 13%. Revenue per student.
That's not close.
Not even close, right?
No.
So it's not a direct correlation. And so that's why it's so important to have these conversations and to have these community meetings to make sure folks know that, what you read, what you see, what you hear, we really need to do the research behind it and understand what's really happening. And every meeting I've had, I've really been diligent about trying to say, what do you need from me?
Sure.
What information do you have that I'm not trying to tell you you're wrong, but I just want to make sure you know it's a very complex system and there might be another lens that we need to examine your same facts on and compare it to what's really happening.
Yeah. So we can exercise an option this year. And from what I understand, it can only be done in a major election. It cannot be done halfway through the year or anything else. So the November 5th election, that is the only time this can be done. And what is the option that's being gone with? I know that there's this weird thing out there called golden pennies, and there's even some copper pennies, and I have no idea what all that means, but I hear it all the time, so I'd love for you to elaborate a little bit.
Well, thank you for that chance because, and I kind of make this joke, I've got a 4, a 7, and a 10-year-old.
Okay.
All boys, and there's boys you can get. And I really feel like if I asked them, hey, what should we call pennies and a tax rate?
Yeah.
They're like, let's call them golden and copper, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's just one of those things that just
Yeah.
tags to it, right? So, but what essentially is, in Prop A, is a 5-cent tax rate increase that results in $5.5 million of funding this fiscal year.
Okay.
And every year moving forward. So I mentioned we're in over a $4 million deficit. So if Prop A were to pass, our $4 million deficit goes away. and we've got some additional capacity to make sure that we're maintaining competitive compensation. We're able to recruit and retain our staff. And ultimately, if Prop A is successful, we're not forced to reduce our staff to reduce that budget.
Okay, so just before you keep going, one of the impacts, if Prop A doesn't pass, is that staff will have to be reduced.
Staff will 100% have to be reduced.
Okay, so we'll come back to that.
And
we'll come back to that.
Things. Yes, sir.
Yes.
And so what the 5 cents that Prop A is raises the tax rate is 3 of those are called golden pennies.
Okay.
Which means that, and it's in Texas Education Code Chapter 48.002, if anyone's really just interested in the research behind it. But golden pennies yield more value to school districts because of 2 factors. One, they require the state to contribute additional state aid once they're accessed.
So you're forcing their hand.
They're forcing their hand. And 2, they're completely void of recapture. The state can never touch any tax collections on golden pennies.
Okay, so even if it overflows the quote-unquote bucket,
if the 3
who
pennies
cares?
overflow the golden bucket, overflow the bucket, those any revenue from golden pennies cannot be recaptured.
Okay.
The copper pennies, they do yield less because they are subject to recapture. The consideration is, though, that as you access the 3 additional golden pennies, the additional state aid helps offset some of that recapture that may present on the copper pennies.
Okay.
The consideration that our school board, and this has been a 2-year conversation. I've only been here since January.
Right.
We have, as a district, our board has been having these conversations about a tax rate election over the last 2 years.
So it's not a willy-nilly, hey, we got to get money, so let's just make this choice.
It's truly not.
Sure.
And within what we're looking at is the golden pennies alone would have barely got us out of a deficit budget.
Okay.
So, and the board could have elected to call for up to a 12-cent tax rate increase and generated additional revenues.
Right.
But again, our board has consistently shown that they want to do right by our kids, our staff, and our people within our community.
Right.
And that's reflected in the fact that they felt like if we can access 5 pennies, that will get us in a better place financially to maintain the level of ability to recruit and retain our staff, maintain the level of student programs that we've offered, and maintain the level of safety and security that we provide our kids.
So what is determining whether or not you get a golden penny or a copper penny?
So if a tax rate election were called and it was just called for 3 cents, those 3 would automatically be golden because that's what we have available to us.
Gotcha.
And the funding formulas are very complex, but Montgomery ISD has been fighting an uphill battle for years based on previous legislation dating back to 2006 in which tax compression took place. And I don't want to get into the weeds of it because it's very weedy, but the tax compression took place and it compressed almost every school district to $1 from $1.50, but MISD was under $1.50, so we were compressed below $1. So those districts that were below $1 at that point only had the ability to access a certain amount of golden pennies versus others were kind of grandfathered in and allowed to access additional ones. So that kind of that really presents the funding gap that we have between ourselves and other school districts, as that's one of those components. Well,
and I'm curious, you may or may not know this, so I maybe just say you don't know if you don't, but what type of, you mentioned the housing increase that happened, but in the last, and you can give me a number, but say 10 years, how has the school grown in number of students? Because my guess is it's like a lot of things. You operate in a small town as a small town, and then all of a sudden, massive boom comes. We've now got a Home Depot that's about to open and a Lupe Tortilla in a little small town that's opening up. We're getting all kinds of restaurants coming in. H-E-B is probably not too far behind across from the Kroger that's already there. So the town is exponentially booming. So what has that done to the student population in relation to the state probably not being able to keep up?
So it's a great question. Within Montgomery ISD, I don't know exactly what the numbers are dating back 10 years, but I know in the last 7 years, we've opened up Lake Creek High School. So we've had to add additional high school. We're up to 11 campuses. We opened up a new elementary school this past August, Creekside Elementary, our 7th elementary campus.
Wow.
And I will tell you in terms of educating folks, a lot of our folks that within our community know Montgomery ISD because they have kids. They have kids that get on the school bus. They have kids that have drop off every day. Or they have grandkids they go watch in sporting events. But there's a huge population within Montgomery ISD that does not have a direct connection to our school district. And so a lot of the questions that we receive is like, why should this matter to me, right? And you mentioned
it's a great question, actually.
The Home Depot and the Lupe Tortilla.
Yeah.
And, property values within Montgomery ISD undoubtedly have continued to rise. And it's not because Home Depot decided to build a Home Depot. It's not because Lupe is now here and you can get great fajitas.
Right.
It's not because HEB might be around the corner. Every single development that says, hey, we're developing this track and it's Beezer Homes or it's whoever homes, and the very first billboard they put up says what? Zoned to Montgomery ISD schools.
Because that's important.
Because that is why.
Well, I'll tell you.
It's a draw.
I mean, I live in Montgomery because of that, because of the schools. I actually work in Conroe. It's a 25-minute commute, which for some people are like, 25 minutes, not a big deal. But when I got 2 small kids and our life is in Montgomery, 25 minutes is a one way. It's a decent amount of time. We could have purchased for cheaper in Conroe, but we chose to be in Montgomery solely for the schools. And I am not even close to a minority of people that are moving into Montgomery for the schools. I'm in vast majority.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal. I mean, so all of this kind of lends itself to go, okay, we're in a place in Montgomery where if this prop doesn't pass, there's severe negative impact. And I'm curious. Let's talk about what some of the negative is, but then I'd rather end on positive.
Before you do
please.
that, because I read a little bit about this, and I mean, full disclosure, I have my kids in private school, and I'd be interested to hear what you have to say for families, because I know Montgomery County in general, it's a big homeschool county, it's a big private school county, and so I can imagine people in those communities are gonna be abrasive towards this. But one of the things I was reading that the prop has to reach. It was designed in such a way that it reaches a threshold so that the state of Texas has to cover 15%. Is that right?
Well, it's not designed in a way. It's just automatically that the fact that if it were to pass,
right,
that's how the math works out, that the state's additional state aid that they would be contributing of the $5.5 million of additional revenue, 15% of that is state aid.
State aid, which is great. I mean, that means that's 15% we're not having to pay. Well, I mean, I don't know. I actually don't know how that works, honestly, because I don't even know if I want to I don't pay property taxes.
Yes. Well, you're in a unique situation.
But yeah. But anyway.
But it's different than just property tax. You're still paying a school tax,
right? But I'm also in Conroe ISD,
right? So it does this specifically won't affect you
me
at all.
Yeah, and that's why I'm I feel like I can ask some questions that
that aren't biased,
right? And the other thing I read about it is that the 5-cent increase is only for homes $350,000 and less. Correct?
So it's for all.
For all.
It's for all.
Well, I mean, but is it more for those that are above that?
Right. So in order to message it in a way that is as consistent as possible,
right,
we try and put a dollar amount so people can relate to it. So we state that on a home valued at $350,000, the monthly impact is about $9 a month for that home.
Okay.
Obviously, as your home value increases, you're probably looking at an additional dollar amount figure.
Right. Are there several tiers? I mean, how does
it's just all based on what your home value is.
Okay.
So it's not a direct correlation.
There's not a threshold. It's just it's the math of your home. And so where do you guys get the home valuations to determine that? Is that the what is that, Kev? Is that
what
appraisal district?
Yeah.
Appraisal district?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So and
So you guys just go off the appraisal district.
Right, and that's just a number that we pull down and say, okay, what can people relate to? What can people kind of pull easy math off of to kind of project out? I will always tell taxpayers, we can communicate it as clearly as possible, but as taxpayers, it's really your job to make sure that you're pulling
your data,
and looking at your numbers, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And educate yourself on how it looks, because there's so many unknowns, right? So I could not pull your appraisal district information from the website of MCAD and say, well, you'll pay this.
I don't want anybody pulling that for you.
So we try and make it as consistent as possible and as clear as possible, and then make ourselves available to answer any questions that might come out. Because it's not as simple as saying, well, if it's $9 on a $350,000 home, that means it's $18 on a $700,000 home, because that's not how that math works. Because there's a $100,000 homestead exemption that could be in place. Other people may have other exemptions. If you're over 65,
you're locked.
Well, that was my next one, is the 65.
If you're over 65 and your school taxes are frozen, they're frozen.
Yeah.
Prop A doesn't impact them a dollar cent.
Well, and I think that's an important one to mention, because people living in Harris County are very, they're talking to people in Montgomery County and like, do you know what just happened to us? Did you hear about that? So they just raised property taxes in Harris County, all of Harris County, by 8% without a vote. And the reason they were able to do it is because of the two natural disasters. They found a loophole in the law that allowed them to say, hey, we need to access additional funding in order to pay for these natural disasters. And it bypassed the 65 frozen law.
So school districts have the same authority to say we're claiming a natural disaster.
Yeah.
And we're going to access additional pennies this fiscal year. Montgomery ISD did not do that, or
chose not to.
Oh, they had the right to.
We have the right to.
Really?
It is an education code that if we declare disaster pennies, that we can say, because of our disaster, and we had Hurricane Beryl this summer, it probably would have looped us into that category of being able to do that, but it's not worth the
amount of distrust,
that you're going to build within your community.
Which, I can imagine. There's a specific judge that was involved in that one. I can imagine she had a contested election last time anyway. I imagine that's not going to bode well for her next go around.
No, not at all. Well, and so you mentioned that it doesn't affect people that are 65 and over because their taxes can't go up. Now, this is not across the board, but I'm guessing that many of the people that don't have kids or grandkids in the school district have been long-term members of the community in Montgomery, and it's very possible that this isn't going to affect them at all. Now, that's an overstatement, I realize, and it's an assumption on my part, but I do find it to be very, very important to mention that. And I'll put it this way. I've just noticed, you talk about the dollar. When you kind of put it into perspective, I mean, you're talking for the average household, 150 to 200 a year is probably kind of where you're sitting, which is probably less than most people's electric bill for 1 month. So the max dollar that you're going to wind up paying is not unreasonable. It's not like you're going, hey, your house is going to go up $1,500 if we do this. That would be unreasonable, right? So I just want to kind of put that out there, but there are some negative impact. I want to end on the positive impact, but some of the negative impact I want you to address. And I know, again, I'm not asking you to tell people, hey, you should vote this way or you should not, because we are not here to have that conversation. But let's address the facts. What will have to happen if this doesn't pass? What is just the ramifications?
So I kind of mentioned the depth of involvement it takes from people to run Montgomery ISD at the level that we've run it and at the success that we've run it. And that goes everything from our bus drivers to our extracurricular activities to our academic expectations to the support that we provide our students and our teachers. Unfortunately, to the safety and security also. Unfortunately, we're legally required to provide a minimum, and Montgomery ISD has just always exceeded that.
Right.
So, for example, safety and security wise, our two high schools, they roughly have 1,600 kids on them, and they're huge campuses. Montgomery High School is really spread out.
Yeah.
So we have two police officers within, we have in Montgomery ISD Police Department, 2 officers at that high school campus. House Bill 3 requires us to have 1 armed officer on all campuses.
Okay.
Just 1. That's a legal requirement.
Elementary,
middle school, high school.
Okay.
1 armed officer.
I don't see how it's possible for one person to cover that campus.
Right.
Lake Creek just did an expansion, and now their campus is massive. And we're not talking about the inside of the building even. We're talking about the football fields, everything. I mean, it's many acres of land to cover.
It really is.
Is requiring an armed officer on all campuses a new thing?
So House Bill 3 was passed in just last legislative session. So that was a new thing. And
which I know that's something I think people in Texas have been clamoring for a long time.
It's good law.
Let's have them.
It's good law. The challenge is, you mentioned kind of what has led us to this financial downfall that we're in is, so that's an example of an unfunded mandate, meaning the state of Texas passed that law. You have to have an armed officer on every campus. The challenge is it did not come with funding to meet that requirement. So we get $240,000 a year for our safety and security allotment. Our MISD payroll is over $1 million
for the whole district,
for the entire district.
Okay. And you mentioned there's how many campuses?
11 campuses.
Well, that's an insanely small amount of money.
So it doesn't even come close to covering.
Does not come close to covering the cost to meet the mandate. So there's that unfunded mandate gap, right? So our payroll is over $1 million a year just for our police department.
Sure.
Right.
So, and the challenge that I as a public educator who believes in the goodness, and you mentioned your children go to private school.
Yeah.
We've got phenomenal private schools.
Yeah.
In and around the area.
Yep.
And I'm great friends. I mean, with several of the administrators within these systems. They've got phenomenal kids. They've got phenomenal staff. They've got staff that love on kids and want what's best for them. And guess what? We have the same, right?
Yeah.
Those same things exist. I'm about kids. I don't care where they are. But my job is to advocate for the ones that are in our care directly.
Sure.
And so, I went to private school up until 2nd grade. And within what we're trying to do and the ramifications of this if it's not successful, and the consequences of that, the decisions that we have to make, safety and security is one of those things where if we know what we're legally, minimally required to do, we're probably going to have to pull an armed officer off of our high school campuses and reduce force with our police staff. We've got staff members like instructional coaches that support our teachers. Teaching looks completely different than it did 15, 10, 5 years ago. Instructional coaches work alongside our teachers to help guide their instruction, to help making sure our kids are making progress academically. I've said this time and again, I've got a 2nd grader that is a struggling reader. And from a high school math teacher, that drives me crazy.
Yeah.
I'm not the guy to sit down with him at the dinner table at night and work on decoding and all
Not
that
your
stuff.
wheelhouse.
But we have academic interventionists that pull him out of class and work with him one-on-one. Well, that's a benefit to the classroom teacher. That's a value add to them. We've got certified librarians. We're not legally required to have certified teachers as librarians in our schools. We do, because they can cover some of the content and instruction in conjunction with the teacher.
Right.
Well, if all those positions go away, those roles and responsibilities, they don't just disappear. That just falls back on the classroom teacher. And if we talk about how could we recruit and retain our staff, we can pay them all we want, but if you overload them,
They're gone.
they're gone.
Yeah, they have to. They
gone.
just can't do it. I mean, there's already a lot of pressure on teachers. There already is. And if you take away the support, it's going to be a challenge. But we're also talking about coaches, right?
Sure. Extracurricular activities, the level in which we've done extracurricular activities. The UIL did us a huge favor and redistrict us with Port Neches Grove.
Thank you.
I mean, that's
a long way.
That's West Louisiana.
Yeah,
right?
it is.
That's West Louisiana.
It is.
And so we take 7 buses down there.
Because you have to.
Three football buses, 2 band, 1 cheer, 1 dance. But how many buses need to get to PNG to play a football game? 3.
Yeah.
The football team, and that's it.
Yeah.
Is that fair to our band that practices their tails off and works to do their halftime performance? No. Is it fair to our dance No. Is it fair to our football team that feeds off that? It's not fair. Right. I'm not saying those programs disappear, right, but it will impact them. Yeah. And Prop A, it impacts every single kid one way or another within Montgomery ISD. Every staff member one way or another within Montgomery ISD. Yeah. Because the funding is this year and every year moving forward. Yeah.
So nurses?
Sure. We're not required to have RNs on
That's
campus.
Unbelievable to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I love my daughter to death, but she's clumsy. And there's often times whenever I get a call from the nurse, and I am so thankful that she's there. Yeah. And I can't imagine not having a nurse on staff at a school.
Yeah. So just so I understand, you're not required to have nurses on all campuses. You do have nurses on all campuses.
We do have RNs. We have RNs on all campuses.
Right.
And the way that districts have started to circumvent that is they may hire an LVN or a certified nurse's assistant on the campuses, and maybe have one district RN that oversees them. So again,
it's a level.
It's a level thing, right? And some of our kids, just because of their needs, whether they're medically fragile students, they require RNs to train to change like trach tubes or other things like that. Requires the support of an RN.
Well, I'm asking because if I understand, and I don't understand a lot, but you need nurses on campus in order to hand out certain kinds of medications. Like you can't just hand medications out to a nurse's assistant, right?
So that's a whole other topic of conversation because I'm
trying to figure out the rationale behind not requiring a nurse on campus when you have so many children, not that I'm saying it's a good thing, that are medicated, that you can't hand those medications off to.
So RNs are actually held to a higher standard on what they can and cannot distribute than anyone else within Montgomery ISD employee, because they abide by and I'm going to mess up the governing body of it, but the nurses.
Well, it's not your world, but yeah,
the nurses' laws, right? The laws that govern nursing, they're governed by those, and part of those say that you're not allowed to handle any prescription, any medication, and hand it to someone that you don't have a doctor's order for.
Right.
So that's Tylenol, that's Advil, that's over-the-counter stuff that historically, and that's a change this year. Like our nurses, our RNs are not handing out Tylenol and ibuprofen unless we have a doctor's consent.
Yep.
Our district policy says anyone in the school district that's an employee can, by parent consent, give over-the-counter medication. So when there's those two conflicting laws, they have
teachers
to go
can do what
by
the nurses can't.
one.
Is that
exactly,
what you're
right? Yeah, it's kind of funny.
Yeah. Well, so we're down security guards, we're down librarians, we're down nurses, we're down coaches, we're down instructional coaches. Who else? I mean, that's a large number of people. Who else?
Well, it goes back to just the ability to. There's going to be some attrition also that just losses through attrition. We'll have central admin positions that will have to go away. Yeah. We've got some people that their entire focus is, I shouldn't say their entire focus because they wear a ton of hats.
Sure.
But community engagement, community support. We do a back to school bash that provides 300 plus, like we had 300 kids come through our central admin office in August and walk out with brand new backpacks with full of supplies. And I'll be honest, in a community like Montgomery, that sometimes is a missed need. We don't always recognize that we have kids that truly are in need.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Those programs have been really successful because we've been able to allocate a person to oversee that and make sure that they're making sure students' needs are met in the building and outside the building. So we've got central admin positions that unfortunately we'll have to lose through attrition.
This is actually some of the stuff that my wife does. I mean, like she's a big community advocate. She works with a lot of different ministries and things like that. I know of areas in Montgomery County where people are living without electricity.
Wow.
And it's like,
it's tough.
Yeah, and there's kids living in there.
Yep.
And they don't even know where their next meal's coming from. But to your point, Montgomery County tends to appear and have the visual of being a very affluent community, and it is. But that just means that those kids living in those conditions are even harder to see sometimes.
Yeah,
for
sure.
They really are, and that's why we put a huge emphasis on the relationships that we have with our kids. Our counselors, they do an amazing job.
Yeah.
There's certain expectations set out through Texas Education Agency on what counselors they should be spending their time on, and unfortunately, I've had to meet individually with all these groups of people: coaches, librarians, nurses, counselors, bus drivers, instructional coaches, and I've had to have these really tough conversations that ahead of us telling our story about Prop A, ahead of calling this election, I need y'all to know that in order for us to tell our story, we have to talk about positions and we have to talk about people.
Yeah.
And I don't want y'all to be on the short end of the stick when it comes to, oh my gosh, I had no idea that this would impact me.
You also don't want them to be surprised when you have to start. Yeah.
Surprised. And so what I will say our board has done a great job of is committing to doing right by our people.
Right.
Meaning we adopted a $4 million deficit. If Prop A is not successful, November the 5th, 6th, election day.
November 5th.
There you go. On November the 6th, we're not doing reduction in force. Like, our people have a job through the school year.
Right.
Because that's what's right.
Right.
Like, if we end the school year at a $4 million deficit, we've signed up to do so.
Right.
The really difficult decisions have to come into play next school year.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's a testament to our board, just saying that of all we can do right by our people. We can be transparent, we can be upfront and honest, and we can make sure that we communicate these challenges along the way. And whether Prop A passes or not, our next focus is with our legislator and making sure that we have to fix, we have to increase the amount of funding that Texas allows for our kids. Commissioner Morath was on a testimony period to the Senate the other day, and he said we're spending $300 million less in public education than we ever have. Student population has not really grown a ton in Texas in terms of public education, but we're spending $300 million less because we're funded on attendance. We're not funded on the number of kids in Montgomery ISD.
Right.
We're funded on the average number of kids that attend on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Regardless of if 95% of the kids come or 90% or 80%, we still have to have the same amount of teachers and we still have to run the same amount of electricity and we still have to do the same amount of things. So per pupil spending in Texas has gone down and continues to go down. And so those are really important conversations that we have engaged with.
What's causing that?
So great question. COVID, coming off of COVID.
I know a lot of people. I mean, I'm one of them. We moved out of public education because of that.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this also. I respect that. You know, you are your biggest job. You run a pest control business. That's not your biggest job. Your biggest job is to make decisions for your children.
Oh, for sure.
And your family.
Yeah.
And mine is also. But what we have seen is, as a result of COVID and this shift to making sure that we're efficient and proficient with online learning management systems, it's no longer that impactful if I happen to miss a day of school. Because I can still access everything the teacher did that day on Canvas or on Google Classroom. And so the impact or the fear of missing a day has kind of gone away a little bit. And so we're more reluctant to, we'll go on vacation a day early, and on the impact of COVID side of it, also, if my kid has a fever, maybe I will take him and just keep him home an extra day because of that. And because all that content is still there and he can still access it. And
has that changed some of the truancy rules?
So that's another one of the biggest challenges. The truancy rules have just gotten less and less and less every year.
Yeah.
Like, our ability to have any sort of teeth with truancy has gone away.
Really?
Completely.
That probably makes Kamala really sad. She liked to lock up those single mamas.
Well, I'm going to keep my mouth shut, which is tough for me to do, by the way. It's tough for me to do. But she grew up in a middle-class family. So anyway.
I'm sure she did.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I say, but does that affect the funding?
It does, yeah. Because
that doesn't make sense to me. Like, if you don't have any teeth to enforce it, why should they be able to pull funding if they're not going to give you the
welcome to the government?
I mean, that makes no sense to me, because I know, like, if you don't show up enough, you lose the funding for that kid, right? But, like, you don't have any means to say, like, okay, like, what's going to happen because they're not showing up?
Correct. And because we're funded on attendance, and this happened last spring, as a matter of fact, one of my first few months within Montgomery ISD, we had a weather situation. and we did not close schools. We opened schools. Our forecast that morning at 3 o'clock in the morning said, by the way, all the weather is going to really be bad about 9 a.m. Well, okay, that's okay. All of our kids are in buildings at 9 a.m. that are built
to withstand.
Yeah. Like there's not safer buildings built within Montgomery County than our schools.
Sure.
That's what they're for. And so, great, let's roll with it. Well, guess what? All that pushed in way earlier than expected. We start rolling buses, and that was the immediate criticism. Was the only reason that this is the decision that you've made is because you want kids to come to school because that's how you're funded.
Yeah.
So it's not just the simple aspect of reducing funding. That's the lens that now we're viewed for every decision that we make. And
but it's easy to Monday morning quarterback that, right? I mean, I mean, like you.
There's plenty of them.
Yeah.
There's plenty of them. And I went on social media or Facebook, recorded a little video, and I said, I'm the one that made that decision. Mm-hmm. Here's why I made it. Kind of going back to that need part that we don't always realize within our community.
Yeah.
There's kids that are better off in our schools than they are at home.
Oh, man.
When their parents leave for the day.
That's true.
In terms of being able to feed them, take care of them.
Yep.
And so at the end of the day, parents' decisions are parents' decisions. If they want to keep their child home, keep their child home.
Yeah.
So let's talk about funding for a minute, because I've seen a lot of criticism with the open enrollment situation, because you may know more facts than I do. I'm sure you do on this, but my understanding is that Montgomery ISD chose to open the enrollment to allow people outside of the district to apply to come to the district. And so if we've got bloated classrooms and not enough, place for some of these kids to go, then why in the world would you possibly open enrollment? And my understanding is there were hundreds of applications, and somewhere around 50 were allowed in. And I may be wrong about that, so correct me. But why in the world would that happen in Montgomery if we're facing all these problems?
So, and you queued it up greatly. Limited open enrollment is opportunity for a student within Tomball ISD, Magnolia ISD, Conroe ISD to transfer into one of our campuses. And the major overwhelming benefit of even that program or that opportunity is funding. It is 100% a funding-based decision. And so we decided this summer to open up limited open enrollment with a very clear emphasis on the limited part. Excuse me. And you actually had pretty good facts there. We had a lot of applications, and over half of those were denied. And it led to about 50 kids that were allowed in Montgomery ISD. And what we did before we opened enrollment is we analyzed our capacity at all of our campuses. And we got to the fact that, okay, the only campuses that we truly have capacity at and our ability to maintain this long term are our secondary campuses. So we had a very intentional plan going into limited open enrollment in that, one, if you allow a 12th grader into Montgomery ISD, they're there for 1 year and they're gone, right? So impact of them minimal other than the funding side of it.
Sure.
We had capacity at our junior highs and we had capacity at our high schools. And so no student was admitted into an elementary campus as limited open enrollment as a sole applicant. Here, I want to come to this campus. My name's Johnny. The only considerations that were made for the lower elementary grade levels is if your sibling was going to be approved at a high school campus and you were at an elementary campus. And a lot of those times they said, well, we want to be at Montgomery Elementary. I'm sorry, we don't have room at Montgomery Elementary. If you want to be a transfer student, you can go to this campus because that's the only place we have room. And so we put very strict restrictions on that. And so in addition to those, for the first time, part of the application process of applying was you had to provide your previous year's discipline record and your previous year's attendance, because it shouldn't be a burden.
Right.
It shouldn't be a burden on our teachers, our administrators, to deal with a student that's an LOE. We don't have to allow you into the district. So, and that's a big reason why over half of those kids, over 50-something%, 58% were denied, is because either their discipline wasn't appropriate or their attendance wasn't appropriate.
Right.
And so, and another thing we did is Texas Education Code states that if you allow a transfer, it's for the year.
Okay.
So there is a way to get around that, and we got around it through a district of innovation that says if we approve you day 1 and day 2, you decide to kick our teacher in the shin and throw a desk across the room and throw your pudding at lunch. Hey, day 2, you're no longer a student at Montgomery ISD. Okay. You can go back to your home district. And
Taste of a perfectly good pudding.
Yeah, right, exactly. Don't waste it.
Especially if it's chocolate.
Some of our food at cafeteria is really good. That's a whole nother topic conversation. But
my kids
don't throw any of it. But so we really were intentional about putting in expectations that made it not a burden on our people. And we still get applications to this day, and we're not approving anybody right now.
Right.
Because, again, I don't think it's right that Miss Smith has had her students in her classroom for now going on 2.5 months, and us insert a child that we don't really have to insert at this time.
Right.
It shouldn't be her job to now catch up Johnny Smith, who doesn't go to Montgomery ISD, to where her other kids are.
Right.
So, again, we really are trying to be as mindful as we can about that. All of our overcrowding that we're having, some of our classroom ratios that are over 22-1 at the elementary campuses, none of that is because of open enrollment.
Okay.
If we have
is that people's beef? Is they're saying like the elementary ratios are way off?
Almost all of our concerns and complaints come as a basis of everything points to LOE. And within Montgomery ISD, we have...
so they're connecting two ideas that have no connection.
Two ideas that they're not directly correlated.
Okay, I got you. Because like
it's the easy thing to point to.
The cynical and suspicious side of my brain is like, okay, as part of the application, like yards per carry.
Yeah. Well, and so let me ask this question. Based on that, what would the deficit be if we didn't have those 50 students here?
So 50 students, and it can, depending on, and that's the consideration about focusing at the secondary campuses, because most of those students enroll in career tech courses, and career tech courses actually generate more funding for us.
Okay.
So
what are career tech courses?
Cosmetology, welding,
awesome.
Emergency medical technician. We've got a CTE center that's being built it's state of the art. It's going to be phenomenal and open in August of 25.
What does CTE stand for?
Career Tech Education.
Career Tech. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And so within the 50 students, roughly, you're probably looking at closer to another $500,000 or so.
Wow.
I can tell you that if across our district we've got, like I said, 9,927 kids, 26 kids, 300 of those are LOE kids.
Okay.
300 across our entire district.
Not that many.
Not that many. And if we had not had those over the last several years, because a lot of those LOE kids have been in Montgomery ISD since like kindergarten.
Yeah.
And now they're seniors.
Wow.
And they've been phenomenal students, and they've done everything they're supposed to do, and
that's why they're still
here.
Have
added value to our district in so many ways.
Yeah.
And so
so what's people's beef? I mean, like why are they...
The fact that their parents or their guardians pay taxes to Conroe ISD or Magnolia ISD, and their tax dollars don't go to Montgomery ISD. But their basic allotment, the amount of money the state gives us, does go directly to us. And what those students have allowed us to do is not call for Prop A 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Like that's what it comes down to.
It's a misunderstanding.
So are people saying like, look, you've let all these people in. If you hadn't done that, maybe we wouldn't need Prop A? Is that is that the line there? Okay, I got you.
Yeah. But it's really adverse.
It's the other way around.
But again, this is why education is so important, and why I'm so glad that you've chosen to be here with us tonight, is to help educate, because it's easy to make assumptions based on the way our brains work. We're smart people. I can figure this out, but the legislation has made it very complicated for sure. So let me ask you another question. So in the neighborhood that I live in, we're zoned specifically to Oak Hills and Keenan, which for those that don't know what that is, it's a junior high and an elementary school that are right next to each other. They're on the same campus. Traffic on the road leading to that campus, it's a 2-lane county road. It's been there forever, I think. it's very bad in the mornings. And we live specifically in a neighborhood that even getting out of our neighborhood into the car rider line is very, very difficult to do. But I know that there is a 110-acre tract of land that was just sold that's about to be a development with new homes. There's another, I believe, 30 acres. That's on the east side of the school. On the west side of the school, I think there's another 30 acres. If you're familiar with that area, it's the area next to the fire station that has a pond on it. And then to the south, I don't even know how big that is, but there's 3 neighborhoods that are currently in development that are going to just completely increase the amount of traffic in that area. So I first I want you to address the traffic issue. How are you as school board people addressing the traffic issue? But I see security officers out there directing traffic before and after school. My guess is if this doesn't pass, the traffic will get worse, because I'm assuming those traffic officers who are getting paid overtime to be there don't get paid whatsoever, which means they're gone, which means traffic gets even worse. What am I even remotely close on any of that?
You're really close on all of it.
Okay.
So yeah, and my kids actually go to Keenan too, so I know that traffic very well. I know the car rider line very well.
Yeah.
And the other implication of Prop A is that I mentioned earlier, we drive over 1 million miles a year, and we transport 4,500 kids every day on buses.
It's a lot.
So if we're forced to reduce staff with bus drivers or implement some sort of radius around our campuses,
traffic goes up.
Traffic goes up because those kids still have to get to school, so they get off the bus and now get in the car rider line.
Yep.
So the amount of transportation we provide is one of those intentionalities about trying to reduce our car rider congestion. And as we mentioned, everyone's available. So if you really don't like the car rider line, put your kid on the bus and we'll get them there.
Sure.
But it is a real concern. And I'm not naive to think of that, people should just be okay because it's school and it's kids. Or I'm also not naive. We talked about earlier the $9 a month or the amount of money it may be. It's real. It's tangible. It means something, right? And I don't want to discredit that at all. But I do try to frame it through the bigger picture of things. And specifically about Keenan, we have officers there, like you mentioned, in the morning and the afternoon. And would it benefit us to have them there earlier and there later? Yes.
Yeah.
But we can't afford the overtime to do so. We have really tried to examine. As a matter of fact, our chief operations and facilities officer did a calculation based on, if we looped this extra section and started double stacking cars, how many cars could we fit and get them off of Keenan? Like, we really do understand that is a challenge. And it's as the community grows, we work in conjunction and coordination with the county. Commissioner Riley is the commissioner in that area, and he's been great to work with. His office has been responsive. We collaborate together. We have conversations. We've done a traffic study in that area. A light at some point will need to be installed right there at the entrance to the campus. And we've also had that conversation with the developers that this is y'all's problem also.
Yeah.
As y'all build and develop out here.
How are you going to attract people to the area if the traffic, whenever they're coming to view these houses that you're building, they can't get to the development? So you're going to have to probably shoulder some of that. Now, and you mentioned a light. I'll mention that Lone Star Elementary, that's on 2854, which is just a nightmare during school time. There's an officer there controlling that light. One of your officers is controlling that light, looking at the traffic, determining when is it time for me to allow cars to go, and how many do I determine get to go through. That guy goes away too. So again, we're talking about major traffic implications if this doesn't pass as well.
Cy-Fair is a great example. If you look back at the news articles and news stories that came out in early August when we started back to school, Cy-Fair cut several $1 million, probably tens of $1 million out of their budget through transportation efforts.
Jeez.
And the result was news stories everywhere about the mile-long car rider lines that they had and the impact to traffic. And we understand, like, people have to get to work.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we want, most importantly, we want our kids to get to our campuses safely.
You know what it makes me think is, because there's going to be more wrecks. There just will be. And it makes me assume that what will happen is people will go, well, to heck with this. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to move. I'm going to go to another place that doesn't have the traffic congestion, so I'm going to move. Well, if you're truly worried about your house and how much it's worth, just wait till people start flocking away, and your home, like there's suddenly, instead of, and we've talked about this a lot on our show about how there's a deficit in homes available, which is part of the reason that we're in the housing crisis that we are right now.
Yeah.
You start taking a neighborhood that has 2 or 3 homes available, and now there's 10 or 15 houses available. What do you think that does to your property value? It's going to diminish it as well. So the impact of we're living in a booming, great area as it's growing, our property value is going up, all these sorts of things. I don't believe that that's going to continue if this doesn't pass. I think that there are going to be things that happen that people are unintended consequences that are far-reaching, and it's not just about the school. It's about the community that you live in. It's about the people that are coming or the people that are leaving, the traffic, the quality of life that you're experiencing. All of a sudden, that 25-minute commute that I'm taking turns into a 35-minute commute and 40-minute commute, and then it becomes a continual problem. So,
well, and it's also obvious that school districts, because of the way they're set up in Texas, can go into decline.
Oh, sure.
And because when we moved back here in the 90s, I mean, like the top one was Klein ISD, and it was for a long time.
Yeah.
And they're just not anymore.
Nope.
And there's probably several factors that go into that, changing, demographics and all kinds of different things. But on the traffic thing, when we were just in Florida, where we were staying was not very far from where I grew up, and I asked the kids if they wanted to go see my old elementary school, and they said yeah. Which looking back on it was kind of grim. The first one I went to was called Challenger 7. I grew up in Cape Canaveral area, so all the schools are named after shuttles. So the first one I went to was Challenger 7, and it was like we had like bomb threats all the time growing up, like because people thought it was funny that shuttle had exploded.
Right.
And then I moved to a new one, which was like, I think it ended up being like 3.5 miles away from my house. I rode my bicycle to school every day. 3.5 miles. Me and my little sister, from first grade on. And I was kind of driving through I could remember how to get home from the school. And so I took the kids to see the house. And my wife just she was like, your parents let you ride your bike to school? And I was like, yeah, everybody did. And I was like, but like also look and see how far the sidewalk is off the main road. It was a good 50, 60 feet away from the road.
Wow.
So there's like a huge gap. And I looked at her and I was like, I think even now, if we lived here, I don't know that I would let my kids ride their bike to school. I kind of feel like that's the way a lot of people feel. Now, I know that's not the case at the school in Wood Forest. I mean, just about everybody rides their bicycle to that school that live in Wood Forest. But there's also like parents riding their bicycle. When I've seen it, it's parents riding their bicycles with the kids.
Yep.
Is that something that's just culturally changed? Do you have many kids riding their bicycles to school? I mean, like,
yeah, we don't. A lot of our campuses aren't just
they're not set up for that.
Neighborhood based campuses. Like, because I was the same way. Like, my elementary school was right in the middle of my neighborhood, so we rode our bikes to school.
Yeah. But I think that's a generational thing too.
We really have one. Madeley Ranch is set back there in Walden, and that is really the one that is a true neighborhood based campus. All the others are kind of off by themselves. But interesting enough, as we mentioned, the developers that have bought out around Keenan, that's one of the things that they would like to engage in conversations with is creating sidewalk access or secondary access around the back of the building, because honestly, if I buy next to Keenan and I've got to get in my car and drive out onto Keenan to go into Keenan,
that would be a nightmare.
It's not going to be good. So hopefully we'll see more of that. Honestly, I think it's a value add. I think it's.
Are the kids in Walden? Are they riding bicycles?
We have more walkers for sure.
Walkers, okay.
A lot more walkers for sure in Walden than we do anywhere else.
Like, I'm not kidding, man. When I grew up, like there was like 10 layers of bike racks.
Yeah,
you know. And like, it was just like, why is that so different? You know, like I get it, like, especially out here. I mean, this was kind of more of a rural community before it exploded. And so they kind of had to build where they could build.
Well, yeah, you look at Wood Forest, and it's very much a planned community that they planned things very, very strategically, and we're currently not doing that so well in Montgomery, just frankly. And part of that is because, especially where we live, a lot of people own property. And a lot of people are on multiple acres, and so putting sidewalks doesn't make sense in an acreage neighborhood. I mean, you live in an acreage neighborhood. There's no sidewalks here.
If you were making the argument that we need to let kids ride horses to school, I am in.
You're in. You're all in.
I will go build the hitch post myself.
I understand.
my boys would be 100% on board.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I joke. I mentioned my second grader. He has more interest than the educational pathway in his life in second grade. And if I let him drop out of school tomorrow, I think he would. If he could just go work cows and
awesome.
he wants to ride bucking horses and
saddle
bronc rider.
Okay,
we'll see how that goes.
Nice.
He's not going to rope because he's left-handed. So
he can heal, man.
He can heal.
I mean, you can still do it, but like they just want you to heal.
Yeah. Well, okay. So before we move, and we're going to wrap this up pretty quickly, but are there any other? I mean, I think we've hit on quite a few negative impacts that are going to happen, and I part of the reason we've kind of sat on this is because I believe that the negative impacts far outweigh the positive, only because the positive is status quo, in my opinion, and we'll get to that in a minute. But are there any other things that we haven't touched on negatively that you're going, okay, we probably need to mention this?
No, I think we've discussed all aspects of it. And it's really easier to have that conversation about the picture of what it looks like if we can't increase our revenues, because it's just factual based. Like, we have a $4 million deficit. What does it mean to have to reduce that? Here's what and that's in my ability as a superintendent. I can't, and you mentioned it earlier, I can't advocate for or against any sort of election-based criteria, especially for the school district. So, but the facts are the facts in the sense that I can say very clearly, whether people hear that as persuasive or not, that we have to reduce staff if WID doesn't pass.
Yeah.
That's a fact. We can't carry a deficit budget again at the tune of $4 million. So, no, I think we've covered it. I think we've covered it really well.
Because you guys already have a plan in place, should it not pass?
So we don't have a
not like every I dotted.
Yeah, we don't have a list. Like, we don't have a chopping block list.
There's not a hit list, right?
But reality is reality, right? Like,
yeah.
All of that takes planning, and at our senior leadership level, we do have an approach to those conversations that we have in place. But no, we have not laid out X, Y, Z.
Right. Yeah.
So let's talk about as long as we need to, but let's shift to the positive. My guess is, because we're really just talking about, you're saying there's going to be a little bit of overage, right? And it's exciting to dream about what those might be, but we're not talking tens of millions of dollars. We're talking $1 million, and you're talking about that's just a police force. Like, that's just a certain segment or a certain thing here and there. It doesn't take long in the world that we live in today to hit $1 million when you're talking about 10,000 students. Okay. I mean, that's not very, very much. But my guess is, I mean, we're definitely looking to just keep where we're at. We're not, I mean, what I'm hearing you say is that this is not like so over and above that, man, we're going to start building stuff left and right, and all this new infrastructure is going to happen, and oh my goodness, it's going to be cherries and strawberries all over the place. I don't know why I picked those two fruits, but what are those positive things?
And so another misconception about Prop A in general is it's not a bond election, right? And you mentioned kind of building and adding these facilities and infrastructure. We passed a bond in 2022, $322 million. And that's what built Elementary School 7. It's built the new CTE Center. It's done renovations on all of our campuses and continuing to do more on all of our campuses. That bond money can't be touched for anything other than build buildings, buy land, buy buses, capital improvement projects.
Right.
Can't touch it.
Was that bond just for Montgomery ISD?
Just for Montgomery ISD.
Okay.
And the tax rate implication on that was zero. Like
Wow.
there was no tax rate increase at all.
Wow.
To pass a $322 million bond.
That's impressive.
And so the positives or the other aspect of Prop A, mentioned it does cover our deficit this year and provide some additional capacity. One of the questions I get a lot from our staff and from other community members is, so are you guaranteeing a raise, a percentage raise for your staff? If it passes, it's a 2% raise for our staff. And the hard answer is no. I'm not in a position to guarantee a percentage. I mentioned to y'all before we started this, I'm as transparent as we can be. I never want to be able to have to back myself out of what I said. And so what I've committed to and what we have as a district has committed to is the sense that our board last year adopted, we're at a $4 million deficit. They passed a 1% raise. That's almost $700,000.
Yeah.
Right? To give our staff 1% raise, that's a $700,000 expenditure.
Wow.
So if you look at just our capacity that we have over what we might get with Prop A, 2% raise and it's all gone.
Right.
So the funding priorities that we talk about within Prop A of recruit and retain our staff, maintain our student programs, maintain our level of safety and security, those aren't just talking about next year. Like Prop A's funding priority for next year when it comes to recruit and retain our staff might be the sense that we don't have to lay people off.
Yeah.
The following year, maybe that looks like let's shift towards the compensation component of recruit and retain our staff. The following year, let's shift to this aspect. So the funding priorities go on in perpetuity. And so some of the things that would be impactful immediately are our ability to just open up some positions that we need to open up. We've got some classrooms at the elementary levels that are over 22-1. State law says that K through 4, you have to be 22-1 student-teacher ratio. If you go over that, you have two options. You can apply for a waiver, or you can hire another teacher and break that classroom up.
Right.
We can't hire another teacher right now.
So waivers it is.
Waivers it is.
Yeah.
So and honestly, that won't be felt. That won't be seen. If we're built, it'll be seen by 22 kids.
Yeah.
It might be seen by
the kids in that class.
Yep.
Yeah.
That class. But those do matter. But those are decisions we're making right now to not hire teachers, that if Prop A were to pass, we could free up and post positions to hire additional teachers.
Sure. And I would say that while a teacher might not get a raise, they are getting a quality raise because now they're not having to take on as much load. They've got help that they may not have had otherwise. They've got kids that aren't getting up, 30 minutes early to get into car rider line than they had to. So their kids are healthier, and there's a lot of impact. And they've got a job. For some of them, they got a job, period. That's a pretty good raise. If you don't not have a job versus having a job, it's a pretty big raise for some of them. So it sounds like there's quite a bit of upside, but it's not so crazy that it's like, oh my goodness, we're out here doing crazy stuff.
No, and that's something. I did an article with Community Impact that was just put out today. I think it was released this morning, and because of this financial storm of a situation that we're in, you mentioned kind of how do we get here? Yeah, there's a lot of things: unfunded mandates, stagnant funding levels, inflation, all those things, and several others. There's not. Prop A is not one wide painting brush that just fixes everything.
Sure.
Whether Prop A passes or it doesn't, our focus is then going to go to our state legislators to say that just to account for inflation. I saw a thing on social media today that said, I want to say it was like a $1,100 or $1,400 increase to the basic allotment, just to give our districts the same buying power they had 5 years ago.
Wow. The
basic allotment needs to go up over $1,000 a kid.
Yeah.
So we need we need changes and we need improvements in the funding formulas for public education. And we know that going into the next session, we've got great relationships with our representatives and our legislators in our area. School choice vouchers is it's going to be declared an emergency item, and it's going to be top of ticket before probably public education ever gets a seat at the table.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other topic of conversation, but
that's an interesting one.
Yeah.
I will tell you, the folks that I know from the private sector don't want it. And that's the interesting part, right? Is
you would think they would.
You would think they would, but they don't. Like, they are strongly, like, at least the ones I've talked to are strongly opposed to a voucher system. The big reason being is that typically government money comes with government intervention. And that's the whole reason that we have a private option, is so, like, and, you know, in Texas, I was looking up the numbers on this. Texas, it's like makes up 6% of the nation's homeschoolers. And then of the private schools in Texas, 60 to 70% of them are religious schools. And that's like, those places don't want government involved.
Right. Yeah.
And so, like, I actually don't know, because when I initially heard about the voucher system, I was like, that actually sounds like a really good idea. It gives people in poor communities access to better schools, potentially. But when you start talking to them about it, it's like, well, then you got to start getting them there.
Yep.
And then you got, like, there's all sorts of things that go along with that the voucher system doesn't necessarily cover. And so it's a weird one. Like, it seems like the people who would benefit it, meaning the private schools, don't want it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know who's pushing this thing.
well, it's statewide. It's a statewide thing.
I know it's coming up, and I know people keep talking about it.
Our senator is the chair of the Senate Education Committee in our area, and again, we've got great relationship with him, and he understands the need that public education has in our area. But he's also a proponent of the voucher system, and what you mentioned exactly to a T. One of the biggest challenges that we have. I mentioned we've got great private schools in our area, great relationships with them. But I actually had a question at a Seniors with Seniors event that we had at Montgomery High School today, and one of the gentlemen said, you know, y'all need to make sure that you're doing everything you can to market yourself to draw kids out of the private schools or out of the home schools, because public education as a whole is not as good as it was. And my response was something along the lines of, so what are your metrics? That tells you public school is not good and private school is good, because we don't take the same tests. We're not held to the same standards.
Right.
We don't have the same interventions and red tape around us as others do. And so until we're requiring the same I mentioned earlier that we don't have control over our expenditures. If Johnny shows up to our school district, who's a special education student who requires high intensity medical interventions or one-to-one behavioral specialists, we have to provide that. If he shows up at this private school down the road or anywhere in our county and says, hey, I'm here to enroll, voucher or no voucher, they don't have to admit that kid.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, all students in homeschool or private school currently that are special education in any way, shape, or form are evaluated by our staff in public education.
Yeah.
It's like we're still required legally right now to go evaluate and do paperwork on those kids that are not in our system and we don't receive funding for.
Yep.
Why are you required to do that?
The law. It's federal law.
Like, even if they're not enrolled.
Even if they're not enrolled. If they're a special education student, we are required to identify and assess, evaluate every kid in our county, every kid within our district.
Okay, so
whether they are
that's if they live in the district.
Yeah.
I got you. Okay.
Well, and I mean, this is my son's not special ed, but he is part. This is it's part of a similar. It is getting into some hairy stuff, but dude, I'm so proud of him. I haven't even told you this, Craig. He just graduated this week out of speech therapy.
Yeah.
And he's been in
awesome.
speech since 2018. Well, he hasn't been in school since 2018, but he has been in speech from the Montgomery School District since 2018 because they are required to treat him before he even gets in school. And that is I'll tell you, as a dad to not have to go and pay a private speech therapist to do that, that's a huge thing. And we let him pick his restaurant tonight. I thought I was going to be late because between open house today and him getting to pick where he got to go eat, and it was just a huge thing for us.
What did he pick?
Whataburger. Yeah.
Well, we need to teach him to aim higher. You got to pick.
You know what? He likes the honey barbecue chicken sandwich.
Look, I don't blame him. It tastes good. I'm just.
I took over the late part for you, so there you go.
No, it's all good.
It's funny you say that. And apparently, how old is your son?
He's almost 10.
Almost
he's
10.
in fourth grade.
My 8-year-old, the one I mentioned, struggling reader and everything, we just dismissed him from special education this summer from speech because, again,
that's awesome.
He was 2.5, 3, and couldn't articulate anything.
Yeah.
And
on either.
So we got him to speech services through the public education system, and he has been in speech and doing speech therapy since he was before pre-K.
Yeah.
And so it's always been part of his thing, and
awesome.
and it's a great feeling to say, you know what, man, the whole purpose of these services and this support is so at some point you can do this on your own.
Yeah.
Not that it's not going to be difficult. Not that you're not going to be able to have some challenges, but you can do it on your own.
They've learned.
Yeah, that's cool.
It's really, really good. Well, what else is there anything like last comments or anything else that we've missed or that you want to add before we kind of wrap it up?
No, honestly, just thank you for the opportunity. I mentioned my passion is our kids and the fact that being as ingrained and honestly just submersed in this topic as I have been since stepping foot in the district in January. I'll tell you the last thing a new superintendent wants to do is call a tax rate election.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. That's not on my bucket list, right?
No,
like
it's a tough place to walk
spend
into.
time investing in building trust in our community before I have to go to everybody and say, by the way, this is our needs and this is our facts.
Yeah.
And so I don't take this conversation lightly. And I don't mean to portray that it shouldn't be a big deal to anybody because it is a big deal. It matters. But so do our kids and so do our schools. But we have a website that you can go to www.misd.org/prop-A. There's videos there. There's other resources there, literature there. At every single one of my community meetings I've had, PTA meetings, PTO meetings, I have explicitly said, folks, I'm here. I want feedback. I want feedback. So obviously that we can do it through a question and answer. If you're not like the raise your hand in class type of person, that's fine. Shoot me an email. I mean, I have taken, we've got a great comms team. They will take Facebook because I don't have Facebook. My wife has Facebook.
What's a comms team?
Communications team.
Okay.
They'll get
We're
comments.
not big enough, kid.
Right. They'll get comments off of Facebook and send them to me and say, hey, how do we respond to this?
Yeah.
And I'll pick up can you give me this person's phone number? Because I'll just pick up the phone and I'll call them and say, I respect your position on it. Can we talk about the facts about where you think things are and where they really are?
Yeah.
Because again, I'm not trying to sway your opinion, but I just want you to be informed when you go cast a vote.
Yeah.
Other than that's it, man.
When you're getting those comments, is there like an overarching theme to like what you're hearing back when people are upset or?
Yeah, honestly, a lot of it just deals with the perception of how we're funded, a misconception of that, and say, well, our property values continue to go up and go up and up, and they do.
Yeah,
they do. But we kind of had that conversation already.
Yeah,
and honestly, our appraisal district is in a tough spot with that also because they're audited. This is a whole other conversation we get into, but they're audited from our comptroller through what's called the property value study, and if our appraisal district is outside of a confidence interval, which is 5% plus or minus their number, or 10% plus or minus. Long story short, if the appraisal district says you have $9 billion of value in your district, comptroller comes in and say, nope, you've got $11 billion worth of value in your district. That means we're funded from TEA based on what the comptroller says, not what our appraisal district says, which means the state of Texas withholds funding from us because they think we're receiving tax collections on $11 billion when we're only receiving tax collections on $9 billion. So the only negative the only consequence that comes out of a failed property value study is an impact to school district state funding. Yeah. And so our appraisers across the state have had to keep up with the property value study component of that side of things and home values.
Yeah.
Wow.
Hey, real quick before we check out tonight, one of the things, because the show is all 50 states, 12 different countries. I think Texas is kind of unique in the sense that we have independent school districts. Could you take a second, and because I know that's not the case in many states. Is there? I'm trying to think of one off the. Do you know any off the top of your head that also operate under that kind of a system?
I don't. I know most are countywide school districts, or Louisiana's got their parishes and however they divide that up.
So what makes this a unique? Because I know that affects the funding because they're independent and all that kind of stuff. How does that make Texas unique in that regard? Because I think there's probably people listening going like, why is it that? Why does yours have to be that way? Shouldn't it be statewide? Shouldn't it be countywide? Shouldn't
So I don't know the historical background of it, but Texas is humongous, right? So to think that we could have one coming from Montgomery ISD in Leon County,
right?
That's like, I don't know what it is off the top of my head, 700 and something square miles or something like that. Like it's immense.
Yeah.
You can't have one school district located in that large of a rural area that all these students can actually be transported to and serviced. And so what Texas has done is we have independent school districts where, like within Montgomery County alone, it's Montgomery ISD, Conroe ISD, Splendora ISD, Willis ISD. I think New Caney ISD actually touches into Montgomery County also. So all of us are independent school districts from each other, from the county. We're all funded the same. We're all public education entities. We're all run by school boards, 7 elected officials. So the laws that govern each of those are the same, but within one county, individual school district boundaries govern and identify the school district that area is zoned to.
Oh, yeah, that's a good answer. It informed me because I wasn't even completely aware of that. So it's really, really good.
Yeah. Well, and from what I understand, it allows some independence so that you can make decisions that's best for your area, and it's not going to necessarily affect Willis.
Correct. Yeah. And there's varying opinions on a lot of things, right? Especially
including this thing right now.
Yeah. There's topics of political nature and sensitive areas where people's beliefs differ, vary. There's a vast difference in what people believe is right and wrong, and that topic holding the time, but it does allow some independence. The challenge is some of the independent part has kind of been stripped out on the laws that govern us and what we're required to do and required to implement.
Right.
And that's some of the charge that we as school districts have, is that as we talk about funding increases, as we talk about ways to better our system, it is to create more autonomy within the local control aspect. Mm-hmm. Like we have 7 elected officials that run school districts. 7.
Yeah.
That's where the majority of our decisions, the majority of what drives our school districts, that's where the decisions should be happening.
Right. Not the
200 and some odd miles away.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you so much. This has been really, really good. We do our best to educate people on this show, and I think that this has gone a long way to do that. If you have more questions, go to the website. We'll link that up in the show notes as well. And we just want to thank you, Mark. Thanks for coming.
Enjoyed it, man. Thank y'all very much for having me. It's been fun.
All right. Yep. We thank you for listening. Until next time, we'll see you later.
See ya.